What's up, my people? I got another video for you. I just watched recently the debate between Candace Owens and Nick Fuentes. I don't even know if it was a bait discussion, whatever you want to call it. And there we got, I think, one of the most comical clips I have ever seen. You had Nick Fuentes saying all types of comedic shit. He said that blacks, people of African descent, have lower IQ, that we didn't discover the wood before Europeans entered Africa. A whole bunch of preposterous shit. I'm gonna like just jump through the video, get different clips, and then I'm gonna add some nuance later on. Let's get to it.
Racial marriage. I'm Catholic, so as you know, it's not a sin to be in an interracial marriage or relationship. But I am racist. I would say I believe in the races. I believe there are white people and black people and Hispanics and Asians, and I think that it's a core part of our identity. It's who we are, and there's like this conservative reflex to say
being Hispanic is an ethnicity, by the way. It's not a race.
We're colorblind. Race doesn't mean anything. And, you know, Pat Buchanan said this. He said, it's not everything, but it isn't nothing. And I definitely lean more towards the latter, which is it really is a core part of who we are. Our culture, our heritage, our ancestors, our customs, all of it. You know, it's not that I don't think that two people can fall in love from different races. Of course they can. And they have throughout history. And the races have mixed throughout history and assimilated. But for someone like myself, I always say on my show, it's just my value. I want to marry someone that looks like me, that comes from a similar background, because I want my kids to look like me. I want my grandkids to look like me.
But are you, sorry, I just want to make sure, did you say I'm a racialist or I'm a racist?
You know, for a long time, I would say I'm racialist. Now I just say I'm racist.
Okay, so when you say you're racist, because these definitions get changed around, racist, you know, anti-Semitism.
At least he's honest. I appreciate your honesty, my man. I appreciate the honesty.
Gets expanded. What do you mean when you say I'm a racist? Because I think most people watching this would go, if you are a racist in the traditional sense of the term, why are you on this podcast, right? Wouldn't you just go, you know what, Candace is black and she's therefore I don't want to speak to her.
He wants your clout. He wants some of your clout. He wants you to share with him. That's why.
Right.
Certainly not going onto your show and saying, why won't Candace have me on? That doesn't really seem to line up with the traditional sense of the idea racist. So
yeah, and I'm using it. I'm being a little tongue in cheek. I mean, for the purpose of understanding, I'd say my views are I'm a racialist. But I do think that we need to deconstruct this idea of racism in the sense that, you know, look, you're black, I'm white. It is what it is. For my entire life, people have been walking around in eggshells about the...
I'm going to skip through some of this filler. I feel like he was just saying some things to, you know, make the conversation less tense. You know, it was...
But when we think of a black neighborhood, we know what that means and why the property value.
But that's black Americans. So this is why I want to understand that Switzerland, you wouldn't see this version of a white person necessarily, or this, you maybe went to the continent of Africa, you don't see this version of a black person either. Like even if you went to to the tribes out in Africa that still exist, they would be a far cry from a black American living in a neighborhood in Compton, right? So I'm trying to understand if you're actually, you think that it's all black people are like this, or if your world is kind of colored by this is what's going on in America. This has failed for 1,000 reasons. Welfarism has definitely, black people in 1940s, stand up. My grandfather, I talk about that denigration and the corrosion of culture. That's happening. White, black, whatever you want to name it, there is this intentional corrosion of culture.
For black people, I would say it would be through the process of integration. You could look at all the statistics from before integration and after integration. The decadence level of culture has been since blacks integrated with white. I think that's a fundamental fact. It's not one you often hear, but I think it's true.
So do you think it's literally, well, this is just what a black person is when they come out? Or do you think that post welfare, LBJ, Great Society, this is what black Americans have become, and I have a right to respond to that and say that as a white man, I don't want to live there?
Well, you know, I think it's more nature than people would like to believe. You know, there's this classic tension of, is it nature, is it nurture, is it cultural, or is it intrinsic, is it racial? And I've always been on the latter side of this among conservatives. Conservatives like to say it's all culture. Black America is the way it is because of hip hop music and the Great Society and that kind of stuff. And I think the uncomfortable reality is a big part of it is intrinsic. You know, one of the big arguments against the abolition of slavery in the 1860s is that, you know, when Europeans colonized Africa, they hadn't discovered the wheel. There's no two-story buildings. There's no writing. There's no written language. Missionaries had to go to Africa in the last century and invent it for the African people because there's no recorded history. They didn't have writing.
So Egypt is not in Africa.
Well, Egypt is a different race. The Egyptians were not black.
Okay, but you said when they went to Africa, so I just want to...
The interior of Africa in the late 19th century, scrambled for
Okay, so
Africa.
we're now knocking Egypt out of Africa.
Well, Egypt is part of northern Africa, sub-Saharan
Right,
Africa.
You said Africa, so I'm not trying to get a gotcha. I'm just responding. You're saying
Okay,
Africa.
sure. Yeah.
It's in Africa. It's Egypt. It's kind of ridiculous to say there was no written language.
Well,
so I'm just trying to get you to...
Sure.
You know,
Egyptians are not Africans.
If I'm not pushing back, the internet will. So, you know.
Egyptians are not racial Africans. When I say
All right, I'm gonna just cut it there. He goes on for a tangent for a couple more minutes, just spewing pure bullshit. And my thing is like the arrogance, the hubris, and the confidence that you speak, like you know for sure. You don't provide any facts. You just fucking rumbling from out the mouth. But I guess that's what the MAGA movement is based off now. Even though I heard recently you was shitting on MAGA, you said that the left was right about Trump. Kudos to you there. You can see the basic that he was a con man. There you go. But let's not even get into that, bro. You know you can just Google shit, and beyond Google, you got AI to help you now too. Like you could just use Chat GPT to get all the information you need. So it's just, is it a lack of effort, or you being intentionally dishonest, or which one is it? But let's go through it, right? Let's start with the basic shit, right? And I'm going to read to you what Chat GPT says, right? All right, let's. All right. The earliest ancient Egyptians were African people, and many would likely be considered black by modern definitions, especially those from Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt is southern Egypt. The way that the Christians looked at the map, the Commanders looked at the map was upside down, right? So Upper Egypt would be like Nubia, Ethiopia. That would be, looking at the map, you would think that's southern Egypt, but they called it Upper Egypt. All right. Especially those from Upper Egypt, southern Egypt, which was closer to Nubia and sub-Saharan Africa. Geographical origin of early Egyptians. The earliest Egyptian civilization arose from the Nile River, especially in Upper Egypt, South, and Nubia, modern southern Egypt, and northern Sudan. Archaeological evidence from pre-dynastic sites like Nubia, Kush, I don't even want to struggle pronouncing that shit. Show culture connections with sub-Saharan Africa. Some early dynastical symbols like royal crowns and kingship rituals likely came from or were shared with Nubian or Sudanic cultures. Physical anthropology. Earlier skeleton remains from pre-dynastic and early dynastic Upper Egypt show traits most similar to other Nile Valley populations in East Africans, not to Europeans or Middle Eastern groups. Scholars like Cheikh Anta Diop and others have argued based on skeletal, linguistic, and cultural evidence that early Egyptians were black Africans. The ancient Egypt language is part of the Afro-Asiatic language family, but with strong ties to African linguistic groups, especially with Cushitic and Cadic branches. Cultural links with Nubia. Nubia, just south of Egypt, was inhabited by unequivocally black African civilizations. There was a fluid cultural exchange between early Egypt and Nubia, more collaborations later in the military rivalry seen in later periods. Many early kings, including the Scorpion King and Nomar, likely had southern roots. Invasion, so that's the movie Scorpion King, where they had The Rock, and I think in The Mummy, they had the Arab-looking guy playing. They were African. But because of shit like that, you think that they're not African. I think it's been purposely done. Idiots like him he doesn't bother to do the research because he doesn't care about it. He just talking out his ass. He got a narrative and he's using all his, but he don't give a fuck about historical evidence. He's just going to say whatever he wants to push his narrative. But let's keep going. Invasions changed the population later. Invasions and migration centuries. From the first invaders was the Hyksos, and people like to say, "Oh, the Nubians was it?" No. When you even look at when Menes created the first dynastical period in Egypt, it was southern and southern Egypt and northern Egypt, so Nubia, combining together to making the dynastical period. So they're not considered invaders, fucking geniuses. But let's keep going. Hyksos, Libyans, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, Arabs did lead to increasing admixture, especially in the Delta. But before those invasions, during the pre-dynastic and Old Kingdom periods, 3100 and 22 BC, this is around the time the pyramids was built, by the way. Just so you know, Nick Fuentes, the population was indigenous to Africa, centered along the Nile and phenomenomically similar to other East and North African groups. Many of them today will be considered black, right? So the people you see in Africa today, yeah, in Egypt today, yeah, they're not African. They're the son of invaders. Yeah, Egyptians current day, I guess. I mean, they're in Africa, so they're African, but they're Arabs, yes, because they're the children of invaders, right? And we can just Google the Arab invasion, right? You can see Abram Az invaded, what is it, 627 AD, right? He kicked the Romans out. Before that, you had the Romans, and the Romans conquered the Greeks, and so that's how they got it from the Greeks. The Greeks conquered it from the Persians. Then you had the Persians, the Hyksos. Like, come on, bro. This shit is you can. This is irrefutable shit. You can just Google this shit. And the fact that you make this argument, it just shows how unintelligent you are, and people look at you like you're not smart at all, bro. You just provocative. I guess it's cool, it's interesting, but to me, and I'm sure smart people, you look like a fucking idiot. Let's keep going. The original ancient Egyptians, especially those from Upper Egypt, were indigenous Africans. Many would be classified as black by modern standards. Egypt's early civilization was deeply rooted in African culture, geography, and people born outside influences arrived. All right, I got some extra clips here. I got my man. I got to throw my man John Henrik in the clip. Not Abraham Shadow. That's Abraham Shadow there, but John Henrik Clark. He was having a debate with Mary Lefkowitz. It was a book that came out called Black Athena by, I forgot his name, Martin. I forgot his last name. He didn't say it in the video. But Mary Lefkowitz, she was a professor. I forgot for which university, but she wrote a book called Not Out of Africa. And I just think this conversation is so interesting because it's talk about the influence of the Egyptian dynasty and its impact on Greek civilization. And Greek civilization is often thought of as the birth of Western civilization, which Nick Fuentes was so arrogantly profoundly speaking of. How it's the greatest civilization, and Europeans are so enlightened and so smart. It's complete and utter bullshit. Even who they like to call the father of medicine, Heraclitus. Heraclitus himself, he was a Greek ancient philosopher. He himself said that the greatest master of medicine and genius thought was Imhotep, the man who built the first pyramid, an African man who became a Greek god. He became a Greek deity, right? He conducted surgeries, brain surgeries, all types of shit. The man was an absolute fucking genius. If you would take the time to sit there and look shit up, I'm not the smartest motherfucker in the world. I'm not a genius, but I take the time and effort to look at things. I wouldn't disrespect European culture because I think Europeans have been contribute greatly to the world, and I wouldn't disrespect African culture either. And the fact that you just do so openly and evidently, this is what people talk about, because a lot of people share your views. They might not say it publicly like you would, be on Front Street with it, but a lot of people share your views. And some are just misinformed, and some are just arrogantly fucking just wrong, and just evidently wrong through their arrogance, even through their arrogance. So I'm gonna play a couple clips from this video, and I'll jump up in a couple places, add my thoughts, and yeah, let's just get started.
So here we have a rather distinguished panel, and I would like them first to begin with their conclusions. They will have about no more than 5 minutes to summarize their major thrust this evening. Professor Clark, we will start with you.
Single point I wish to get across before we start anything. I am not here to debate with anyone. I have devoted all of my adult life to this subject. I only debate with my equals. All others I teach. Shall we continue or what? I'm not clear now.
Go ahead, Dr. Clark.
Patrice?
Go ahead, Dr. Clark.
Broadly speaking, honestly speaking, the book, Not Out of Africa, a good sophomore effort, is not really about Not Out of Africa. Last year, it was the bell curve. This year, it's Not Out of Africa. Next year, it'll be something else. This is part of a world war against the role of African people in the history of the world. If we began history, began mankind, how is it that the last branch of the human race to enter that arena, marked civilization, now think they brought civilization? Now, it is part of a war over and above Professor Lesterwitz's book and over and above her political naivete. Her naivete.
By the way, the author of the book, Black Athena, his name was Juan Burnell. It slipped my chain of thought earlier, but there you go.
Naivete is about what is happening in the Western world. There was a recent book called The Tribes. It diagrammed every people, major people on the earth, searching for a piece of turf for themselves. It left out the African people because the other people, including Asian imperialists, have plans to take over Africa. There have been several articles in the New York Times advocating the recolonization of Africa. This book and other literature of this nature mean to prepare the world to accept a rationalization for the re-enslavement of Africa. Now, and when you deal with the black endorsers of the book, running dogs of the new imperialism, professional white behind kissers, and as Carlos Cook used to say, a disgrace to the skin they wear. These people, if I'm be so kind to call them that, are running from themselves and teaching us a lesson that we should have learned long ago. Sometimes white wannabes are more dangerous than whites.
I know Candace have been doing a lot better, especially with the Palestinian Israeli conflict, but her origins, when I first heard of her, was during the Black Lives movement, and she made her whole reputation on being anti-black or anti-black movement. The quote he just said might perfectly describe her, and that's shit.
They are running from their own people and running from definition. Now, what we need to look at now is how Professor Lesterwitz neglected the white writers through history, the radical European writers who wrote positively of Africa and who identified the relationship of Africa to the ancient Greece. Now, if given time, and I probably won't be given it this evening, I can prove to you with your satisfaction, if you are listening, that Rome and Greece was not European creations. These were Mediterranean-inspired nations and couldn't be created by Europe because at the time there was no Europe. Huh? Huh? All right.
Do I take it? Oh.
I now ask Professor Lesterwitz to present her 5 minutes.
I think that was such a valid point. Speaking about how Greek and Rome were Mediterranean civilizations, even though they were based in Europe, but there was no outside excelling civilization in Europe at the time. There was scattered tribes in Germania and Britannia. It was scattered tribes. There was no sense or cohesion of a real civilization in terms of what you mentioned, Nick Fuentes. Basic, I'm sure it was some type of language, but no explicit written language. no explicit form of arts or anything of any discrete. While we had pyramids, we had hieroglyphics, and I don't want to just solely rely on Egypt, because you said let's talk about sub-Saharan civilizations. You got Mali, you got Benin, you got Ghana, you got Songhai. What the fuck are you talking about? You just literally talking out your ass, just saying anything you want without any facts or evidence to back you up. Come on, bro. What the fuck are you doing? You look silly.
Conclusion. Can you hear me?
Well, let me just begin by saying what my book, Not Out of Africa, isn't about. It's not an attack on Afrocentrism. If Afrocentrism means recognition of African achievements in the world, it doesn't seek to deprive Africans of their rightful heritage. Africans do not need Greece to have a cultural heritage. They have a rich cultural heritage. Egypt is just one part of it.
Even she don't deny that Egypt was an African society, Nick. Come on, bro. What world are you living in, bro? You sound stupid.
They don't need Greece. I'm concerned because what is being offered in some quarters as African history is really a European myth. And thus, instead of getting real information about Africa, what people are learning is something that's really 18th century French. It's Eurocentric, it's based on Greek and Roman myths. I do not myself think that one should do that, because Egypt itself is so fascinating, so rich. There is so much that you can learn and know, and that I myself, as a result of all this work that we have been doing for the last 4 years and more, have come to know and understand about Egypt. I would like to now spend a great deal of the rest of the time that I have learning about that, because
So the Greek philosophers you admire so much, sweetheart.
it is so different. It's so different from what the Greeks thought that it was. Herodotus was very impressed by Egypt. He wanted to say that everything in Greece that he could think of came or had some connection with Egypt. He didn't really understand the depth and richness of Egypt, which went in directions way beyond what he knew from his own experience in Greece. So I am concerned about that in Not Out of Africa. I've tried to explain why the notion of an Egyptian mystery system, which is basically a French invention, it's based on a novel that everyone has forgotten about, but still you can find in some very obscure libraries, get it up in Boston even, and that book, which was by a French priest, is based on Greek and Roman sources and tries to describe a Greco-Roman Egypt, and that this myth was preserved in Freemasonry and thus came into American culture. So I'm concerned that that myth not be taught, the notion that there was an Egyptian mystery system. Instead, I'd like to see people learn, all people learn, not just black people, white people, any people learn about Africa and the civilizations therein. And Egypt is particularly appealing because it's so old, it's so impressive, its role in the Mediterranean was so vast, and so many other civilizations were touched by it. Even if only slightly, they did get touched by it, and we have to work on that. I would like to say, just in my
Jump ahead a little ahead.
I would like Professor Brunel to conclude in 5 minutes or less.
Well, I agree with Professor Lefkowitz that Africa does not need Greece. There are plenty of glorious African civilizations. It's just that it happens to have Greece, or to have influenced Greece to a significant thing. This is not an issue of politics, it's an issue of history, the way things were. Now, Greece is extremely important because it is the single greatest source of European culture, and therefore we are concerned with it. And it is very interesting to note that European culture did not begin in Germany or Sweden, but at the extreme southeast corner of Europe, and the reason for that is quite straightforward. It was the closest area to the great civilizations of northeastern Africa and southwest Asia, and this East Mediterranean complex was the source of Greek and hence, I believe, European culture. Now, that's not to deny that there was a great deal of local development within Greece, and I certainly do not propose that Greek culture was merely a projection or an imitation of Egyptian or Semitic culture. It's clearly a very distinctive culture, but to try and understand Greek culture without knowing the background of the ancient cultures behind it would be as absurd as it would be to study Japanese culture without knowing the Chinese and Korean roots behind it, and no East Asian specialist would dream of doing that. That you have to see the cultures as interrelated, and that the older cultures and the more elaborate cultures had the predominant cultural influence. One of our basic disagreements is that Mary Lefkowitz, sitting in the 20th century, feels that she knows better than the Greek historians of the 5th and 4th, 3rd century, when they said...
Such a great point he made there, because a lot of current day historians who don't want to give credit, people on YouTube who don't want to give credit that the Egyptians were black. You can look at Metatron, that fucking idiot, and then some different historians who want to give credit to the influence of Egyptians on Greek cultures, like to cite, oh well, Herodotus didn't mean this when he said that. Oh, he didn't mean that. That's not what he meant. This is what he meant. I find it humorous. But let's look at Oh, yeah, I asked about Hecataeus of Abdera. He was a historian and a philosopher in 4th century BCE. So he was a Greek historian, ethnographer who lived at the time of Alexander the Great. He traveled widely and wrote about various cultures, including Egypt. His works are mostly lost, but fragments survived through later authors like Diodorus Siculus. He later said, according to later sources, Diodorus Siculus and his Bibliotheca Historica, Hecataeus claimed that Egypt was the source of many civilizations and that Moses was an Egyptian priest who led a group out of Egypt and civilized other lands. Moses, led the Jews out of Egypt and founded many cities. He taught them laws and customs and had colonized their other lands. In these accounts, Egypt is portrayed as a civilized force and Moses as a key figure who brought Egyptian knowledge in the wider world, which is quite different from the traditional biblical account, but aligns with Greeks' attempts to harmonize their understanding of foreign cultures within their own history. Hecataeus of Abdera, okay, so I was referring to, he claimed that Egypt was the origin of civilization for many peoples. He also described Moses as an Egyptian priest who helped spread Egyptian cultures. Then I also asked chat, I said, tell me how ancient Greeks spoke about ancient Egyptians and Africans, and tell me a bunch of ancient Greeks who did. Pardon my spelling errors. I'm having a beer. Leo, this is the best beer in Thailand. What it makes your soju. Absolutely delicious. If you ever get a chance to drink it, mix it, have at it. It's delicious. All right. The ancient Greeks had immense respect for Egypt, often viewed as a cradle of wisdom, religion, and civilization. Their views on Egyptian and Africans, especially Nubians, Ethiopians, were nuanced, often admired and sometimes mythologized, of course. Occasionally colored by stereotypes, significantly more complex and respectful than many later European interpretations. Here's a list of notable ancient Greeks, writers, and philosophers who wrote about Egyptians and Africans with a summary of what they said. Herodotus, which they were talking about in the debate, wrote, known as Father of History, a Greek man. That's, of course they got to give it to some type of white man. Focused heavily on Egypt. Traveled to Egypt and was fascinated by its culture. Called Egypt the gift of the Nile. Describes Egyptians as having dark skin and woolly hair, comparing them to Colossians, Black Sea people. Come on, bro. Said they was black with crinkly hair. It ain't too difficult. They still Ethiopians are still black with crinkly hair. It's not too different. When people in the Sudan are still, even though they've been mixed with the Arabs, they still black with crinkly hair. It's not hard to understand. The Colossians are Egyptians. The Egyptians said it was so, and myself judged it so, partly because they dark skinned and woolly haired. believe Greek religious ideas came from Egypt. Not only did he, Alexander the Great did as well. We can go to that later. Plato, student of Socrates, claimed that Egyptian civilization was far older and more advanced than Greece. We all know that. Amaya, the Egyptians' law, education, and religion. And Timaeus, he recorded an Egyptian priest telling Solon, a Greek statesman, that the Greeks are like children in knowledge and compared to the Egyptians. You Greeks are always children. You have no belief rooted in old tradition and no knowledge, hoary with age. Timaeus. Aristotle, student of Plato, tutor of Alexander the Great, wrote that Egyptians lived in hot climates and with dark skin. His ideas about African and other non-Greeks sometimes reflect the hierarchical thinking, though so less than later thinkers. So basically saying that the Greeks were under the Egyptians. The Egyptians were more of a hierarchical group of subset of people, which is the complete opposite of what modern day Europeans live by and think. It's ironic. Discuss Egyptian political and religious systems with a mix of admiration and critique. Then you had Diodorus Siculus. This is what they referred to when speaking of, what is his name? Hecataeus of Aberdare. Claimed that Ethiopians, Nubians were the first humans and originators of religious worship. We all know that. First people came out of Africa. Europeans were people who crossed the Bering Straits and competed with Neanderthals during the Ice Age, wiped out all of the Neanderthals. Maybe that's part of why that murderous strand of DNA has been maybe passed down with that R-type strand DNA, which gave them fairer skin and lighter eyes. Believe that Egypt was colonized from Ethiopia, Nubia, which we know is true. Well, I don't want to say colonized, but it's from upper Egypt, southern Egypt, had civilizations first that moved upwards northern to southern Egypt. This is during the pre-dynastical period before Midias created the first dynastic cool period. You got the Ethiopians say that Egyptians are one of the colonies, Biblical Therica, echo older traditions that Black Africans, Ethiopian Nubians were wise and pious. Strabo, I've never heard of him, but wrote extensively about Egypt and Nubia, described Egyptian cities, pyramids, geography. This is 64 BC, 24 BC. This is around the time of Cleopatra, Mark Antony, Pompey, Cleopatra, during that whole era. You got Pythagoras. This is even before the Peloponnesian War, 570, 495 BCE. Traveled to Egypt to study mathematics, astronomy, and spirituality. Saw Egypt as a source of mystical and philosophical wisdom. Egyptian priests who believed that have influenced his thoughts, especially regarding the soul and afterlife. Seychelles, I never heard of him, so I might be saying his name wrong. If anybody want to comment in the comment section, if you know how to pronounce it correctly, that'd be nice. In the Suppliants, he described the Danaids, women who flee Egypt for Greece. The play, so he wrote a play. The play reflects awareness of cultural and racial differences, but portray Egyptians as kin to Greeks in myth. Lucian of Samosta, Assyrian Greek. Yeah, he commented on Egypt's mythical status as a land of ancient secrets and arcane wisdom. And I mean, even that's true to this day. Look at the dollar bill. Look at your money. You got pyramids, and you got the all-seeing eye of Horus. You got all types of shit that refer to, in the way that DC was built. It was built in the image, I think, of I don't know which Egyptian city, if it's Alexandria or it might be something else, but even the Masons know that it's arcane knowledge and wisdom within Egyptian society, African society, that's still, prevalent to this day. So let's get back to the video.
That there were significant influences. Yes, he was very impressed. Yes, he was very Greek. But what struck him were specific similarities. And Herodotus, was rather applauding historian. He said, well, what's the reason for these similarities? I think they're too close for coincidence. I don't think the Egyptians could have borrowed them from the Greeks because they've had them so long. Therefore, the most likely explanation is that the Greeks took them from the Egyptians. And this is what I call the ancient model. And this model was not overthrown until the early 19th. Now, Mary Lefkowitz mentions the 18th century novels, and at times, despite the attention she's devoted to dismissing my book, I sometimes feel she hasn't read it. because I do devote quite a few pages to the novel Setos, which she talks, and I too have read it. It had to be sent by interlibrary loan to me, and I do think it is important in the formation of Masonic thought. But what she does not bring forward is the fact that this was perfectly orthodox history as understood in the 18th century, and going back beyond the 18th century to the view that the Greeks and Romans had of the Egyptian sources of their own culture. Now, I think that the Greeks were, on the whole, a very intelligent people, and I respect their philosophy, their art, their democracy, their science, but I also respect their history, and this is a great anomaly in Mary Lefkowitz's approach, in that she says they're very good in these other respects, but they cannot be trusted with their own history. So that I want to bring that out, that one has... Now, she says that modern classics has dismissed all this, and it's true that the predominant view of modern classicists is that the debts to Egypt and Phoenicia, and I don't want to underestimate the importance of Levantine or Southwest Asian influences on Greece, that these influences were exaggerated by the Greeks, and I think that they clearly were, I think they were properly developed, and to some extent the Greeks may even have played down because they were very conscious of being Greek and proud as being Greeks, and they were affected by two forces. On the one hand, they wanted to plug in to the ancient civilizations and give themselves cultural depth. On the other hand, they were very conscious of being Greeks and wanted not to be surpassed culturally by the Egyptians and Phoenicians, who were still very much around. So they had two forces working on them. Modern scholars working in an intensely racist 19th and 20th century had no double force. They had the single force wanting to make Greece pure, white, and European, and the ideological pressure that put on the scholars led to what I see as the recent dismissal of Egyptian and Phoenician influences on ancient Greece.
Thank you.
As a Baptist Sunday school teacher, I wanted to teach junior class in Sunday school, so I learned to read very early. What baffled me from the beginning was the Bible itself. I could not find my people in a book that's supposed to be about all mankind. And what called my attention to the neglect of Africa was the Sunday school lessons with all those white angels. And when they said God is love, God is kind, God is no respect of kith or kin, I kept wondering, why didn't he let at least one or two little brown or black angels sneak into heaven? So I began to suggest that somebody else had tampered with God's book in favor of somebody else, and that the Bible, to a great extent, was a rationale for European domination, but had been used as such. Then, coming to, after leaving Georgia, after a white man that I've worked for, if he's alive today, he's a liberal with a capital L. His name was Gagsteiner. I asked him about some books on the African people in ancient history. And in the language of the South, he let me down slow. He spoke kindly. He said, John, I'm sorry that you came from a race that has made no history. But if you persevere, if you obey laws and study hard, you make history someday, and you personally might one day be a great Negro like Booker T. Washington. Booker T. Washington was the one thing whites approved of at that time. All right. While doing chores at a local high school, holding the coat and the books of a recitalist, I opened a book called The New Negro, and I found an essay by a Puerto Rican of African descent, Arthur Schomburg. The essay was called...
Same like me, just personally, my father's Puerto Rican, my mother's black, so I read a book or two about Arthur Schoenberg. Definitely could relate. But let him describe a little bit more.
The Negro digs up his past. Now I knew I was not only older than slavery, I was older than my oppressor. And my oppressor was the last branch of the human race to enter that arena. Mock civilization. Don't get mad, get smart. Prove me wrong. Now, in the Old Harlem History Club, under Willis and Huggins, long since dead, John Jackson, who died only a few years ago, we had to take up a collection to bury, Charles Seifert, J. Rogers, under all of these teachers pointing me to good material, and Arthur Schomburg telling me, go study the history of your masters. Study the people who took you out of history. Then you'll understand your history. I started on an old chestnut, recently mentioned, H.G. Wells' Outline of History. It is still worth reading. It is a good basic outline. His basic facts are in order. When he tells you about the Crusades, he's not off one iota, but his interpretation is basically Eurocentric to the point of being a prejudiced document. Now, I was reading these kinds of books. I was reading Spingarn's Decline of the West when I was 18 years old. So I began to read European masterpieces, and I began to read European curiosity about Africa. Gerald Massey's 6th volume, Egypt, Light of the World, 2 volumes. Natural Genesis, 2 volumes. Book of the Beginning, 2 volumes. And I began to read Gerald Massey's attitude on religion and his idea that nearly European concepts of religion were stolen from outside of Europe. He was not a historian. He was not an Egyptologist. He was an agnostic, fighting the arrogance of the European of that day. See, the History Club led me to not only reading masterpieces by white radical writers who set the black radical writers in motion. A whole lot of claims blacks did not make until they saw the documents and works written by Europeans. And these works written by Europeans, what black had the time and the money to sit down and do a 6-volume work?
Well, Dr. Clark?
I think that was such a profound point. And it's often I spoke about, I want to do another separate video on this entirely later on down the line about the origins of Christianity and how it's been politicized. But I mean, even works that came from the Old Testament, the 10 Commandments, those were literally stripped off from the 48 negative, 10 of them were stripped off from the 48 negative confessions, which is part of the Book of the Dead. I got that waiting for you in the chat too. Here we go, look. Talk to me about how the 10 Commandments coming from the 48 negative confessions. This is a fascinating topic that explores how elements of the 10 Commandments from the Hebrew Bible may have been influenced or shared similarities with the 42 negative confessions, often mistaken called 48 from ancient Egyptian religion, particularly from the Book of the Dead. Oh, I mistake. I tell you I had a couple drinks and wrote 48, sorry. The 42 negative confessions, also called the Declarations of Independence, appear in the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Especially chapter 125. These are statements the deceased make to the gods, especially Ma'at, the goddess of truth and justice, to affirm their moral purity in the afterlife. The confessions are structured like, I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not lied, I have not committed adultery, and so on for 42 more sins. They're recited as part of the justice ritual where the deceased's heart is weighed after the feather of Ma'at to determine their worthiness to enter the afterlife. Comparison with the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments from the Bible, Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, are a set of divine laws given to Moses by the God of Mount Sinai. Many scholars and comparative religions experts have noted parallel moral principles between the two. Here's a side-by-side comparison of a few. To 10 Commandments, you should not kill, negative confession, I have not slain people. You should not steal, 10 Commandments. Negative confessions, I have not stolen. You should not commit adultery. I have not committed adultery. You should not bear false witness. I have not spoken lies. Honor your father and mother. I have not caused affliction to my parents. You should not covet. I have not been covetous. Come on, it aligns too perfectly. You get what I'm saying? You gotta understand, Egypt was the metropolis of the world. You got the pyramids, you got the Temple of Alexa, you got great archaeological buildings, like just straight great art, great culture. So of course you have other cultures that's, you know, in the vicinity of this culture, they're gonna rip some things off. I mean, that's abominably clear. These similarities suggest a shared moral tradition, or at least a convergence of ethical principles. Moses was said to have been raised in Egypt as per the biblical account that alone invites questions about Egyptian cultural and moral influence. The Book of the Dead predates the Exodus account by hundreds of years. Versions of the text date back to at least 1550 BCE, while Moses, if historical, would have lived around 1300, 1200 BCE. Some scholars argue that Jewish ethics and monotheism developed in dialogue or reaction by Egyptian religion, especially during and after Egyptian captivity. Yeah, in terms of the first monotheistic religion came from Akhenaten, father Tutankhamun. That it was one God. Before you had Ra, you had this, that it was just one God, the sun God. Do I remember the name? No, I don't remember the name. But you know, the idea of monotheism comes out of Africa. So did the Ten Commandments come from the negative confessions? Direct deviation is not proven, but moral overlap is undeniable. It is more likely that both sets of rules reflect a broader ancient Near Eastern moral code. Principles like not stealing, not murder, respect the divine, and honor and familiarity were common across many societies. But you have to understand, the Nile Valley civilization is the oldest civilization dated to be known. People later say that the Fertile Crescent, but that was just the first made civilization in terms of like set civilization. The Egyptian civilization, the Egyptian dynastical period came later, after the civilization of the Fertile Crescent, but not saying that it's an older civilization. The Nile Valley civilization goes back to 10,000 BC. You get what I'm saying? These are just the term civilization, not the idea of a civilization, but the term of, you know, this is an empire, basically, like the empire term. Um, you know, so the Nile Valley civilization is the oldest dated. So, you know, it comes from there. Sigmund Freud, Moses and monotheism theorized Moses was influenced by Akhenaten's monotheism. There you go. And perhaps by Egyptian religious thought more broadly. George G.M. James, A Stolen Legacy, argues strongly for Egyptian influence on Greek and later Judeo-Christian thought. His works is controversial and not widely accepted in academic Egypt. I don't know about George G.M. James' workings, but I do know about Sigmund Freud. And I think the sentiment he made is unarguable. Final thoughts. While the Ten Commandments are not a copy paste of the 42 negative confessions, there's compelling evidence, damn near copy paste. There's compelling evidence that ancient Egypt had a codified moral tradition long before Moses, and that Egypt ethics likely influenced the early Hebrews, which Western civilization's religion is based off. Current day, because before you were polytheists and you believed in many different gods. Either way, the Ten Commandments and the 42 negative confessions share striking moral parallels, and given Egypt's deep cultural legacy, it's plausible that early Hebrew moral codes were shaped in parts by Egyptian ideas of justice and personal conduct. Let's jump back to the video. I just wanted to throw that out there. We're going to move this up to 54:15.
If you deal with this, you have to deal with what Professor Leslie accused me of, not paying attention to historical chronology. And if she read any of my texts, any of my numerous guides and curriculars, and lecture notes, you know that I'm a specialist on chronology. I know that one comes first and two comes second. But what I was trying to get across is that in the 8th century to the 12th century, saw the intellectual emergence of Europe. At a time, Egypt was in its 23rd dynasty and dying after nearly 10,000 years of some forms of organized society. Europe intellectually was just being born. And I further maintain that Europe in general had nothing to do with the creation of Rome and Greece, and yet the challenge of Rome and Greece created Europe because they were scattered tribes, and the challenge of Rome and Greece brought them together, and they became a people strong enough to create a state. If anybody got any information to the contrary, state the information to the contrary. I maintain that there was no Europe. You're giving Europe credit for things that happened before the first European war. Shoe or lived in a house that had a window.
Yeah, what he said is undeniable. Look at Nick Fuentes like to talk about the Anglo was a tribe and the Saxons was a tribe. They came over and took over Brittany. They moved into Brittany when the Roman collapse was happening. The Visigoths, the Vandals, the Ostrogoths. These are nations that helped build and shape and turn Europe into Europe. But this happened off the collapse of the Roman Empire, which was a Mediterranean civilization as alongside the Greek civilization. So that's undeniable.
And I'm saying that you have not read, not just Massey, Joe Massey, and his European disciple, Churchward, Signs and Symbols of Primordial Man, the Origins of Religions, and his extensive work on Freemasonry. You've not read the American disciple of Massey, Alvin Boyd Kuhn, Who is This King of Glory? One of the best written books on the Christ story, when he proves that the basis of European spirituality was taken directly from Africa.
Professor Rogers, would you like to follow on your question?
I mean,
no one is actually maintaining that literary Greek culture pre-existed any number of Near Eastern cultures. Again, I find it a bit curious.
I don't accept Egypt as Near East. I accept Egypt as physically a part of Africa, created by the Africans from the South.
Even if I concede or admit or agree with you that Egypt is part of Africa, what I'm about to say.
She's looking at him like, please don't do this. Egypt is a part of Africa. Please don't do this. He's doing what you're doing, Nick. You just a little bit more disrespectful with it. He tries to cut over it a little bit. It is African, bro.
There will be order. Thank you. There will be order. Thank you very much.
Do I detect some disagreement? My point was going to be that the most recent scholarship about the genesis of those two oral epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey, points, in fact, in another direction to influence, and that is, in fact, the Hittite Empire, whose documents we can read very easily, and there may well be independent confirmation of the historicity of some form of a Trojan War in those documents. And so what I'm really asking is, why is it that we're just really looking in one direction when we're talking about the origins of Greek civilization?
Professor Clark?
I want you to understand his point. He started talking about the Hittite Empire. That was an ancient Greco-Turkic civilization of people. They lasted for quite a while, but have no type of architectural, linguistic, philosophical footprint in history the way the Egyptians had. So this is his point. Even though they were, neighbors to the city-states of the Aegean, well, this is before the city-states of Greece, but of the Aegean, you got, even though they were neighboring, the Egyptians were, you have to understand, they were colossals of their time. They're colossal even still to this day. They're the longest lasting civilization in history. America is 300 years old? It's a fucking infant. And we're already on a border of collapse. You got the CIA not only overthrowing governments, but engaging in pedophilia. So let's see how long this lasts. But the Egyptians lasted for thousands of years, bro. Again, there's no fucking comparison.
He wrote home to his mother and said that he at last reached the land where the Greek gods began, Apollo and Zeus. And he wanted to consult one of the great African teachers of oracles. And the oracle asked, how old is this man? He said, 32. They said, in 20 years, maybe he'll be wise enough to ask me a question that I care to answer.
Professor Clark, would you like to ask Professor Rogers a question? All right, we are waiting. Professor Clark?
Yes.
It is your turn to ask Professor Rogers a question.
My main concern is that they seem to have equated the civilizations of the Tigris and the Euphrates with the civilization of the Nile. What proof do you have that the civilization of the Tigris and the Euphrates predated the civilization of the Nile?
I don't think that I said that, and I don't think that anyone maintains that. I think that the Hittite Empire obviously comes at a much later period.
I know very clear when the Hittite Empire came, I know what damage they did.
What the fuck does the Hittite Empire have to do with the Fertile Crescent? What the fuck is he talking about? Why is he even on the stage?
Because I maintain that every people who came into Africa, Greeks, everything from modern day English, everybody that came into Africa did Africa more harm than good. And that Africa owes nothing to outsiders in regard to development, because all of them declared war on African culture, war on African civilization, war on African ways of life. They began to bastardize Africa and confuse and create a kind of historical schizophrenia that the Africans had even gotten rid of to this very day. And they created whole words that did not previously exist, like Middle East. Middle from what?
In round two, Professor Lefkowitz, you may ask a question of Professor Clark.
Professor Clark,
That's the face somebody make when they get their ass handed to them. That's the I eat ass face.
do you think that we should always judge history in terms of race?
Look, there was no such thing as race in the psyche of the world until the Europeans put it into the psyche of the world. The Africans knew nothing about race and didn't think they belonged to anything called a race. And when the Africans saw the Europeans, because they have a traditional hospitality to strangers, they didn't fight them, they didn't kill, they were curious about them. And with the African explorers, especially Mungo Park, went into Africa, nobody hurt him, nobody shot at him, nobody shot any arrows at him. The Europeans went in peacefully, but the Africans heard that Mungo Park was a pork eater. Most people don't know it, but Africans were not great pork eaters, and they're not great pork eaters today. Pork was a meat you ate in a certain ceremonies, certain times a year. But we were not great pork eaters before we came to the United States or forced to the United States. But in the United States, we had to eat the part of the pigs that white folks threw away, so we made delicacies out of it and survived. I had this argument with Malcolm X. I said, if it wasn't for the black woman making delicacies out of pig feet, pig heels, guts, chitlins, you and I would be here arguing the point. I'm afraid that you're not only a delinquent in African history, you're delinquent in African folklore. So much of our history is tied up with our folklore, but Europe has introduced words that didn't exist in anyone's vocabulary before. No one ever thought of anybody being inferior or superior. Intelligent people don't even devote. A human being can't fall into that category. And nobody had the extensive problem the Europeans had with women, because in the period of feudalism in Europe that lasted over 1,000 years, the white woman in Europe was a vassal. But the African woman has never been a vassal in that sense. They've reached the culture unity of black Africa, dealing with the history of the matriarch. And he got all evidence right there that we were the first people to support a woman as head of state. We were the first people to put women as riding head of her army. We were the first people to make women a god.
Let's look at after Caesar was assassinated, and after the civil wars between Mark Antony and Octavian, and when Octavian became Augustus, and he fought the Abyssinian queen in Ethiopia. I think her name is Hashputa. You get what I'm saying? Who gave Caesar a fucking run for his money, and they had to nobody won the war. They just called it called it off. Caesar made a deal after a while because it was so fucking deadly and costly to the Roman Empire. Come on, let's jump ahead. I know this video is really long and I'm playing a lot of clips, but I just think it's really informative and it's well worth watching.
In this last round, before we get to questions, and we will get to questions, but let me warn you, you ought to have questions that are questions, not lectures, and that are straight to the point. In this round, it will be a free-for-all in which all of the discussants are permitted to ask questions of each other and to chime in responses whether they are asked the question directly or not.
Will we have time to sum up?
Yes, we certainly will.
I just wanted Professor Lefkowitz to know some basic information about the concept of Afrocentricity. There's a lot of people who believe in the African awakening and discovering of their history and their culture who do not accept the word Afrocentricity because it's a compromise with the word African. It's either African-centric.
Sorry, I was talking. I forgot the mic was on. I don't like the term. I always just call it history because I feel like the current day view of historical narrative is Eurocentric. And I think that's undeniably arguable. We don't call it Eurocentric. We just call it history. So let's just call it all history. It could be different narratives in history. Yeah. When you had the war with Mycenae, the Greek states, and Troy, they had the Greek Mycenae narrative, which was made by Homer, and that's the Odyssey, and the Iliad, and all that shit. But I'm sure the Trojans had their narrative too. I wouldn't call that, less historical in a sense. It's history, just different narratives, different perspectives.
Or it's nothing. And if she attacked Afrocentricity as the teacher of myth, have she attacked the nonsense about Columbus discovering America? Because he discovered absolutely nothing, and he committed an act of genocide. He set in motion an act of genocide 10 times worse than the act of genocide in Europe called the Holocaust, as though that was the only Holocaust in the world. That event in Europe was wrong. And even if only 6 people were killed, it was wrong. But it was a matter started in Europe by Europeans that should have been solved in Europe by Europeans.
Anybody can answer?
Oh, anyone. Oh, you can answer. I'm sure that you're aware, as we are, that there is a spectrum of Afro and African-centric views. I'm a little bit curious what you think, then, of the work of Asante, who, as far as I know, does call himself an Afrocentrist. Are you saying that Professor Asante's work actually is flawed conceptually?
I'm saying that all work under the guise of Afrocentrist is not perfect, but it is an earnest effort to restore Africa to a proper commentary in human history. I think Professor Sanchez's work is written too fast, and there's some things he hasn't checked out as well as he needs to, and I think too many times Afrocentricity becomes a personality cult, but that don't mean that I'm against African people discovering their history, their literature, their place in the political science of the world. That don't mean that I have not played a role in encouraging people to write about Africans in all the systems of the world. See, your talk keeps telling me what you have not read. You could not have been asking these questions about Afrocentricity if you have not read Anacalypsis, 2 volumes dealing with the massive explosion of African people throughout the whole world. You could not possibly have read with any degree of understanding the 3 volumes, Africans in early Asia, Africans in early Europe, Africans in early America. We're not talking about no hearsay. We're talking about documents. Professor Joseph Harris's book, The Global Dimensions of the African Diaspora. I don't know, I mean, you keep telling me, you keep confessing your ignorance with your questions. You have not read, I'm telling you, before Afrocentricity, radical Europeans had pioneered in this work. Now, I haven't even mentioned the radical black writers that you probably have not read. Now, if you read Chancellor Williams' chapter 2 in the book, Destruction of Black Civilization, read that chapter 2 called Egypt, Ethiopia's oldest daughter, and it deals with the southern African origins of Egypt. If you read a book called Nubia, Corridor to Africa, once more you got it. Also you got the early Arab slave trade. I keep saying nobody came into Africa to do African people any good. After the Romans had disgraced themselves trying to be early Christians, the Africans thought that by accepting Islam, they could get the Romans off of their back. They were right. They did get the Romans off their back. But the Arabs replaced the Romans on their back, and the Arabs are still on their back.
Speaking of book reading, I'm a little bit curious.
The relevant issues, and these are fantasies that were held by the 19th and early 20th century scholars.
I'm surprised that no one mentioned the book When Egypt Ruled the East, Keith Seeley. What you call Western Asia, what is Western Asia, mistakenly called the Middle East, was an extension of Africa itself. It was really Northeast Africa. And the people were interchangeable, and we seem to have neglected this very important.
Very important. I remember people talk about, you know, a body of water at the bottom. You understand that the Suez Canal was made in the 20th century. That wasn't there before, brother. That was, you know, that's a man-made canal. Before that, it was a land baron. You could just walk to and from. So I think even the Western, like the early Canaanite people could have been interchangeable with, you know, northeastern African indigenous people. I think they were interchangeable. How else? I'm not even going to make that point. Let's go.
Aspect of then in looking at Herodotus was no fool. Herodotus was a good reporter. When you told him something he didn't believe, he said he didn't believe it. But he said the tint of the complexion of the Ethiopians and the Egyptians seemed to be the same. So let us at least concede, that's not an analysis now, that's an observation. Let us concede that Herodotus at least had good eyesight.
Is Professor Clark claiming that Herodotus did go to Ethiopia?
He encountered Ethiopians as well as the Egyptians. The people, we misuse the word Egyptian anyway. That's a Greek word, and the Africans never call that country Egypt. But he encountered both. Then there were other writers. Count Barney's Ruins of Empires, and Delepsis' work on the comparative study between the cultures of the Upper and the Lower Nile. Mean that people keep telling me what you have not read.
Well, one of the things that we did read, and we did actually put in our volume, was a very long and comprehensive essay by Frank Snowden of Howard University, who I'm afraid to say disagrees with you completely and cites many...
Change Frank Snowden name or Candace Owens name in the part that's about to happen. Let's exchange it with Candace Owens. As he's saying Frank Snowden...
Now, you will not dare judge the Jewish people and their plight in Germany by the Juderon. These are the Jewish police who chose other Jews to go to the gas chambers. You will not judge the Jewish people by that, on that method. And you cannot judge us by cop-outs and runaways and professional white ass kissers.
Let me answer. Excuse me. Yes. You're quite right. I don't make judgments upon people based on those kinds of slanders. I judge their evidence.
But the question arose early in this conversation, Professor Rogers. How prepared are you to be a judge? That was the initial question that I asked you.
At all. I am dealing only with written work. The people who write.
Just one more clip I want to show from here. And I'm gonna end the video. I know those who stayed and watched, I had you here for a while. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I remember the first time I seen this, I was like, I was mesmerized. You know, I sat there and I researched everything John Henry Clark was saying. And yeah, it was real. It was abundantly evident. And it came to a point where European scholars now don't debate any of this shit. You have Arab scholars I wouldn't even call them scholars, but Arabs out of Egypt who would debate this now. It's not a debated argument at this point. So the fact that Nick Fuentes felt the need to say this is just like, bro, shut the fuck up. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. Shut the fuck up. You don't know what you're talking about, bro. You know what I'm saying? Come back with facts and not shut the fuck up.
Nevertheless, he writes, I do not find her exposition cool, detached, and reasonable, despite her efforts to make it seem like that. It is, in fact, as I wrote in my review, an impassioned polemic. Of course, Mary wants to look scholarly and detached, but hers is the scholarship of the National Association of Scholars, which is funded by the same people that funded Not Out of Africa, and that leads us back to where Professor Clark began on the general political context in which this book has appeared.
I will defend Professor Leskowitz's innocence because she is a pawn in somebody else's game. As I said in the beginning, it is beyond the lack and dislike of Afrocentricity, which has not even developed enough to be called a discipline. It is a world war to prepare the mind to accept the re-enslavement of Africa, to remove from the mind of all people anything good that the Africans.
You know, while they pillage your resources and still, you know, it's an interesting thing that I found out recently. That like 80% of the rebuilding of Europe came from resources and minerals out of Africa during World War II. So we had the Marshall Plan in America. We thought we paid for most of it. No, most of it was pillaged and looted in Africa. Could you fucking believe that?
Has done, and to ignore the fact that Europe set up Africa to fall apart by imposing on Africa, through miseducated Africans, a nation state. The nation state is un-African. The African thrived at his best in the territorial state. Many cultures, many languages, side by side, challenging each other, fertilizing each other. What you might call an empire, if you study the last 1,000 years before slavery, the development of independent states in the Western Sudan, Ghana, Mali, Songhai, destroyed by the invasion from North Africa by the Arabs attacking the North African Muslims, attacking the African Muslims, and destroying the great University of St. Korea, exiling its greatest scholar, Ahmed Baba, who admonished his students, believe in God and science. The Africans never separated God from science. The priests were scientists. The priest was the most knowledgeable person. That's why you had the concept of a priest God. Now, if they wipe this out of the mind of our children, and our children look at television and sound bites and think they were nothing but a nothing, when they re-enslave Africa, they're going to say, good Father. They're preparing us to accept it. They're preparing the world to accept the re-enslavement of African people all over the world. And I'm saying that Ms. Leskowitz is a pawn in their game, and the tragic irony of it, she is the pawn in the game of people who turn their backs on her people and let them be killed by the millions. American intelligence, French intelligence, British intelligence, the intelligence of the Western world knew exactly what was happening to the Jews in Germany. We raised our voice against this in the old Harlem History Club, 1939 to the death of the leader in 1941. If you think that, if we could get into the nonsense about black anti-Semitism, blacks have always had a sentimental attachment to the Jews. They actually believe the Bible. You know, we are the true believers. We out-Pope the Pope, we out-Muhammad Muhammad. But religion has always been a political thing to Europeans, and still is. And when it no longer serves them politically, they're going to discard it. They turn their backs and let this happen. Now they're creating a new game because Europe has spoiled Europe. They want to take some geography outside of Europe. They say the people they're going to take the geography from are unworthy. They can't rule themselves. Of course, they cannot rule themselves in artificial states set up by the Europeans. First place that Africa has to do is to just get rid of these borders, reestablish the borders along the old line, and integrate Africans into Africa.
All right, that's my video. I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did making it, especially since I'm drinking while making it. Yeah, Nick Fuentes, shut the fuck up when it comes to African people or African history or anything of that nature. You're a fucking idiot. You don't know what you're talking about. Women don't like you. You're fucking weird. Shut up. You know, a broken clock is right 2 times a day. There's certain things that you say that I agree with, but it's a lot of shit that you say is just evidently wrong. Shut the fuck up. But yeah, that's it. That's all I wanted to say. I hope you guys have a good one. I hope you enjoyed the video. See you guys on the next one.